Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Computer Scientist. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey through the forgotten corridors of gaming history, where wooden boxes transformed into monuments of interactive entertainment. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking into an arcade in 1978. The air is thick with anticipation and the faint smell of electricity. Neon lights pulse in rhythm with electronic beeps and bloops. Before you stand rows of towering machines, each one a portal to another world, each cabinet a carefully crafted vessel designed to capture your attention, your quarters, and your imagination. But these magnificent machines didn't appear fully formed. They evolved slowly and deliberately from the humblest beginnings. What if the arcade cabinet had never evolved past a simple wooden box with the screen? The entire arcade experience, and perhaps even video game history itself, would be drastically different. We're taking a deep dive into the fascinating, often overlooked history of early arcade cabinet design, exploring the pivotal innovations and design philosophies that transformed rudimentary structures into the iconic, interactive monuments we know and love. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet darkness, we'll trace the lineage of these gaming relics. We'll discover how engineers solved problems you never knew existed. We'll explore the artistic choices that turned functional objects into cultural icons. And we'll uncover the ergonomic considerations that allowed players to lose themselves for hours in front of glowing screens. This is the complete history of early arcade cabinet design, a story of innovation, artistry, and the relentless pursuit of immersion. So breathe deeply, let your mind wander back to those neon-lit rooms, and let's begin. Before we can understand the arcade cabinet, we must first understand what came before it. The story doesn't begin with Pong or Space Invaders. It begins decades earlier, in dimly lit establishments where mechanical marvels dominated the entertainment landscape. These were the predecessors, the electromechanical ancestors that established the very concept of coin-operated amusement. Pinball machines had been capturing quarters since the 1930s. These mechanical wonders required substantial housing, sturdy cabinets built to withstand the violent shaking and aggressive play of enthusiastic participants. The pinball cabinet taught manufacturers crucial lessons about durability and construction. It needed to be heavy enough to resist movement during vigorous play, yet accessible enough for operators to perform maintenance and collect coins. The slanted playfield demanded specific angles and reinforced glass. Every element served a purpose, and every design choice was dictated by the mechanical necessities within. Shooting galleries and electromechanical games similarly required robust enclosures. These games, featuring mechanical targets, rotating displays and intricate timing mechanisms, were housed in wooden cabinets that prioritized function over form. The wood was thick, the joinery was simple but strong, and the aesthetic was purely utilitarian. Chrome trim might add a touch of glamour, but the primary concern was creating a box that could survive years of constant use in often rough environments. When the first video games emerged in the early 1970s, designers naturally turned to these existing models for inspiration. But video games presented entirely new challenges. Unlike pinball machines with their complex mechanical interiors requiring substantial space and ventilation, early video games consisted of relatively compact circuit boards, a monitor, and simple controls. The question became not how to house complex mechanics, but how to present this new form of entertainment in a way that felt substantial and worth the player's investment. The Pong revelation changed everything, though not in the way you might expect. When Atari released Pong in 1972, The first commercial installation was famously placed in a Sunnyvale, California tavern called Andy Capp's. The original prototype wasn't housed in a purpose-built cabinet at all. It was installed in a basic wooden enclosure, little more than a box on legs, with the essential components crammed inside. The simplicity was striking and revealing. Here was a game that required no moving parts beyond the player's controls, no mechanical complexity to dictate cabinet design, and yet that simplicity demanded its own solution. The early Pong cabinets, when they were finally manufactured for wider distribution, reflected the utilitarian philosophy of their electromechanical ancestors. Built primarily from plywood and particle board, these cabinets were designed for one thing: survival. The construction was straightforward, often featuring simple butt joints reinforced with corner braces. The wood was usually 3/4-inch plywood for the sides and back, with sometimes thicker material used for the base to support the weight of the monitor and the constant pressure from players leaning against the cabinet during intense matches. Material choice in this era was driven almost entirely by economics and practicality. Plywood offered an ideal combination of strength, workability, and affordability. It could be cut, drilled, and assembled quickly, which was essential for a fledgling industry trying to capitalize on a new phenomenon. The surfaces were often covered with laminate or vinyl in solid colors, usually black or dark wood grain, which helped hide the inevitable scuffs and scratches that came with arcade use. Some manufacturers used tempered hardboard for certain panels, particularly rear access doors, where weight reduction was more important than structural strength. The joinery methods reflected the speed and scale of production. While fine furniture might employ dovetails or mortise and tenon joints, arcade cabinets relied on efficiency. Butt joints, where two pieces of wood simply meet at right angles, were standard. These were reinforced with wood glue and screws, sometimes with corner braces or brackets added for extra strength in high-stress areas. The assembly line approach meant that cabinets could be produced quickly, though not always with the precision or longevity of more carefully crafted items. But even in these earliest designs, we can see the seeds of what would come. The control panel, even on basic Pong cabinets, was angled toward the player. This wasn't an arbitrary choice. Someone, whether through intuition or experimentation, recognized that player comfort mattered. An angled control panel meant players didn't have to hunch over as much, reducing fatigue during extended play sessions. The monitor was positioned at eye level for a standing player, ensuring clear visibility without neck strain. These ergonomic considerations, however rudimentary, established principles that would guide cabinet design for decades. The Pong era also established the basic form factor that would dominate arcade design. The upright cabinet, standing roughly 6 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide, became the standard template. This height made the machine visible across a crowded arcade floor while remaining manageable for operators to move and position. The width accommodated the monitor comfortably, while providing space for the control panel and leaving room inside for the circuit board and power supply. The depth, usually around 2 to 3 feet, balanced stability with space efficiency. Too shallow, and the cabinet might tip forward when players leaned on it. Too deep, and it wasted valuable floor space in cramped arcade environments. Coin mechanisms were integrated into the cabinet from the beginning, typically mounted in the front panel below the control area. These required their own considerations. The coin door needed to be accessible to operators but tamper-resistant. The coin box needed to be large, enough to hold a substantial amount of quarters but accessible enough for regular collection. The mechanical coin acceptor itself, borrowed from earlier coin-operated machines, needed to be mounted securely to ensure proper operation. These seemingly mundane details occupied considerable attention in early cabinet designs. The rear of the cabinet typically featured 1 or 2 access panels that could be opened for maintenance. These panels were usually held in place with simple lock mechanisms or even just screws, allowing operators and technicians to reach the circuit boards, monitor, and power supply when repairs were needed. Ventilation was crucial, as the electronic components and cathode ray tube monitors generated significant heat. Early cabinets often featured vents cut into the rear panel or sides, sometimes just simple slots or holes, later evolving into more sophisticated louvered designs that prevented light leakage while allowing airflow. As the 1970s progressed and more manufacturers entered the market, we begin to see variation and experimentation within this basic template. Some cabinets featured curved sides or beveled edges instead of simple rectangular boxes, adding visual interest while maintaining structural integrity. Others incorporated coin-operated lockable storage compartments, allowing arcade operators to secure high-value items or spare parts within the cabinet itself. The control panel area saw particular innovation, with different manufacturers experimenting with various angles, heights, and layouts to find the optimal player interface. Gun games presented unique challenges that pushed cabinet design in new directions. Games like Seawolf, released by Midway in 1976, required players to use light guns to target objects on the screen. This necessitated different ergonomics entirely. The cabinet needed to support the weight of the gun and its mounting apparatus, and the player needed to be positioned farther from the screen to effectively aim. These cabinets often featured a wider, deeper footprint and sometimes included a raised platform or step to help players reach the optimal height and distance from the screen. Driving games, emerging in the mid-1970s with titles like Grand Track 10 by Atari, introduced yet another cabinet variation. These sit-down cabinets broke entirely from the upright template. Players sat in what was essentially a small cockpit, with the monitor positioned in front of them, and controls including a steering wheel, pedals, and gear shift integrated into the cabinet structure. These elaborate setups required significantly more space, materials, and engineering, but they offered an immersive experience that upright cabinets couldn't match. The construction had to be even more robust, as the dynamic forces from steering inputs and the weight of seated players put stress on different parts of the structure. By the end of the 1970s, the basic vocabulary of arcade cabinet design had been established. The upright cabinet was the standard, built from plywood and particle board with simple joinery, finished in dark laminates that could withstand abuse. Control panels were angled for comfort, monitors were positioned at standing eye level, and coin mechanisms were integrated into accessible front panels. Rear access panels allowed for maintenance, and ventilation accommodated the heat from electronics. These weren't artistic statements yet. They were functional solutions to practical problems built by an industry still learning its craft. But something was beginning to change. As arcade games became more successful and competition intensified, operators noticed something crucial. In a room full of similar-looking cabinets, players were drawn to certain machines over others. And it wasn't always because the game itself was better. Sometimes it was because the cabinet was more eye-catching, more inviting, more memorable. The realization dawned slowly but with profound implications. The cabinet wasn't just a container for the game. It was part of the experience itself. The box was about to become art. As the 1980s arrived, the arcade industry stood at a crossroads. The technological novelty that had initially drawn players was beginning to wear off. Video games were no longer a curiosity, they were expected. Competition between arcade operators intensified, and owners needed ways to attract players to their specific establishments. Similarly, game manufacturers needed their titles to stand out on increasingly crowded arcade floors. The solution would come not from better technology alone, but from a revolution in how arcade cabinets looked, felt, and presented themselves to potential players. The transformation began with side art. Early cabinets had been largely blank canvases, their sides either bare wood finish or solid colour laminates. But some creative manufacturers began to see these large flat surfaces as opportunities. Space Invaders, released by Taito in 1978 and licensed to Midway for US distribution, featured distinctive artwork on its cabinet sides. The imagery was simple but effective, depicting the iconic aliens from the game in bright, eye-catching colours against a dark background. This wasn't just decoration, it was advertising, branding, and atmosphere creation all in one. The impact was immediate and measurable. Arcade operators reported that cabinets with striking artwork attracted more initial attention than plain ones, even when the games were similar in quality. Players walking into an arcade would naturally gravitate toward machines that caught their eye. These side art served as a visual hook, a way to communicate the game's theme and excitement before a single quarter was inserted. This realization sparked an artistic arms race, with manufacturers competing to create increasingly elaborate and eye-catching cabinet designs. The methods used to apply this artwork evolved alongside the designs themselves. Early decorated cabinets often used vinyl decals or appliques, which could be printed relatively inexpensively and applied to the cabinet sides during or after assembly. These decals had to be carefully applied to avoid bubbles or wrinkles, and they were somewhat vulnerable to peeling at the edges, especially in humid or high-traffic environments. Some manufacturers experimented with direct screen printing onto the wood panels, which was more durable but required more specialized equipment and couldn't be easily changed if a design needed updating. The artwork style of early 80s arcade cabinets reflected the aesthetic sensibilities of the era. Bold, primary colors dominated, often with high contrast between bright elements and dark backgrounds. Science fiction themes were prevalent, with space imagery, robots, and futuristic landscapes appearing across dozens of cabinets. This made sense given the popularity of science fiction in broader culture, following the success of Star Wars and the continued space race imagery in public consciousness. The art style tended toward the illustrative rather than photographic, with clean lines and simplified forms that reproduced well in the relatively low-resolution printing methods of the time. Pac-Man, released by Namco in 1980 and licensed to Midway for US distribution, took cabinet aesthetics to a new level. The cabinet featured not just side art, but a coordinated visual design that extended across every visible surface. The distinctive yellow and blue color scheme was instantly recognizable, and the characters from the game were prominently featured in playful, appealing artwork. The cabinet wasn't trying to look serious or intimidating like many space-themed games. It was fun, friendly, and approachable, which perfectly matched the game's broader appeal. The success of Pac-Man demonstrated something crucial. Cabinet design could expand a game's audience. The bright, cheerful aesthetics helped attract players who might have been intimidated by the darker, more aggressive appearance of games like Space Invaders or Asteroids. Women and younger players, demographics that had been underserved by the arcade industry, found Pac-Man approachable in part because the entire presentation, cabinet and all, felt welcoming rather than exclusionary. This lesson wasn't lost on other manufacturers. The marquee, the illuminated sign at the top of the cabinet, evolved from simple text to elaborate artistic statements. early cabinets often had plain marquees with just the game title in basic lettering. But as competition intensified, marquees became key branding elements. They featured artwork, logos, and sometimes even translucent panels that allowed light to shine through coloured designs. The illumination itself, usually provided by a fluorescent bulb behind the marquee panel, served multiple purposes. It made the game visible and identifiable from across a dark arcade. It added to the overall atmosphere and excitement of the space, and it drew the eye upward, making the cabinet appear more prominent and substantial. Donkey Kong, released by Nintendo in 1981, showcased sophisticated marquee design. The marquee featured the distinctive logo with its bold lettering and the character artwork that would become iconic. The illumination made the marquee glow, creating a beacon effect in dimly lit arcades. The entire cabinet, with its blue and red colour scheme and character artwork showing Mario, Donkey Kong and Pauline, created a cohesive visual identity that was immediately memorable and distinctive. The control panel overlay became another canvas for artistic expression. This area, which players looked down at constantly during play, evolved from simple labelled buttons to elaborate artwork that extended the game's visual theme. The overlay typically consisted of a printed panel, often laminated for durability, that sat above the actual control mechanisms. This panel would show the button layout, sometimes with instructions, but increasingly it featured thematic artwork and design elements that matched the cabinet's overall aesthetic. Colour psychology played a role in these design choices, whether consciously or intuitively. Red cabinets, like those for Donkey Kong or Galaga, conveyed energy and urgency. Blue cabinets suggested technology and precision. Black cabinets with bright accent colours created drama and sophistication. Green could indicate alien or otherworldly themes. These colour choices weren't arbitrary. They were part of a visual language that communicated to players what kind of experience awaited them. A bright yellow cabinet with cartoon characters promised light-hearted fun. A black cabinet with angular red accents suggested intense action. The bezel area around the monitor also received artistic attention. This frame, visible during play, helped transition from the cabinet's exterior design to the game screen itself. Some games featured elaborate artwork on the bezel that extended the game's visual theme right up to the edge of the active display. Other games used simple black bezels to focus attention entirely on the screen, letting the gameplay itself be the focal point. In some cases, the bezel included practical elements like a speaker grill or small instruction cards, integrating function with form. Lighting effects beyond the basic marquee illumination began appearing on higher-end cabinets. Some games incorporated strips of coloured lights along the cabinet's sides or around the control panel area. These might pulse or flash in response to game events, creating a more dynamic and attention-grabbing presence on the arcade floor. Star Wars, the vector graphics game released by Atari in 1983, featured an elaborate sit-down cabinet with lighting effects and a yoke controller that made the entire machine feel like a simulator rather than just a game. The golden age of arcade cabinets, roughly spanning from 1980 to 1983, saw an explosion of creative design approaches. Manufacturers understood that they were selling experiences, not just games, and the cabinet was a crucial part of that experience. Every visual element was considered, from the overall colour scheme to the smallest details of button layout and labelling. The artwork wasn't just slapped on, it was integrated into a holistic design that reinforced the game's theme and appeal. This era also saw the emergence of recognisable cabinet styles associated with specific manufacturers. Atari cabinets tended towards sleeker, more angular designs with sophisticated artwork, Williams cabinets often featured bold, dynamic imagery with strong colour contrasts. Namco cabinets, particularly for their character-based games, emphasized friendly, approachable aesthetics with rounded forms and bright colours. Players began to recognize not just individual games, but families of games by their cabinet designs. The artwork production itself became a specialized industry. Artists and design studios emerged specifically to create cabinet art for game manufacturers. These artists had to balance several demands, creating eye-catching designs that would attract quarters, representing the game's content and theme accurately, working within the constraints of the printing and application methods available, and ensuring the artwork would remain appealing and legible even after months or years of wear in arcade environments. Some of these artists became unsung heroes of the arcade era, their distinctive styles recognizable across multiple classic games. The international variations in cabinet design also became apparent during this period. Japanese arcade cabinets, even for the same games, often featured different artwork than their American counterparts. Japanese designs tended toward more intricate, detailed artwork, with different color palettes, and sometimes entirely different character representations. These differences reflected not just artistic preferences, but cultural differences in what was considered appealing and marketable. A games cabinet might be extensively redesigned when moving from one market to another, with new artwork commissioned specifically for that region. By the mid-1980s, the visual language of arcade cabinets had become sophisticated and diverse. A skilled observer could walk into an arcade and identify dozens of distinct design approaches, each telling a story about the game within and the audience it hoped to attract. The humble wooden box had become a canvas for creativity, a marketing tool, an atmospheric element, and an art form in its own right. But even as these aesthetic innovations flourished, engineers and designers were simultaneously solving another set of challenges, making these beautiful machines comfortable, durable, and efficient for the players who would spend hours in front of them. While artists were transforming cabinet exteriors into eye-catching works of art, engineers faced a different challenge, ensuring that players could comfortably and effectively interact with the game for extended periods. Ergonomics, the science of designing equipment and environments to fit the human body and its capabilities, became increasingly important as arcade games grew more complex and play sessions lengthened. The solutions developed during this era weren't always perfect, but they represented genuine attempts to understand and accommodate the physical experience of gaming. The control panel angle was perhaps the most critical ergonomic consideration. Early cabinets often featured control panels that were nearly horizontal, angled just slightly toward the player. But as operators and manufacturers gathered feedback from actual arcade use, they discovered that this configuration caused players to hunch over uncomfortably, especially during long play sessions. The solution was to increase the angle, typically to somewhere between 20 and 30 degrees from horizontal. This steeper angle meant players could stand more upright, reducing strain on the neck and back. But the angle wasn't just about the panel itself. The entire geometry of the player's position mattered. The height of the control panel from the floor, the distance from the panel to the monitor, and the angle at which the player viewed the screen all contributed to overall comfort. The optimal configuration placed the center of the monitor at approximately eye level for an average height. Standing adult, with the control panel positioned so that a player's hands could rest naturally on the controls without raising the shoulders or bending the wrists excessively. Different game types required different ergonomic solutions. Vertical scrolling shooters, where the action moved primarily up and down the screen, benefited from monitors positioned slightly higher, allowing players to track upward movement more easily. Fighting games, which emerged later in the arcade era, often featured slightly lower control panels to accommodate the vigorous joystick movements and rapid button presses their gameplay demanded. Racing games with steering wheels needed the controls position to mimic actual driving positions, with the wheel at a height and distance that felt natural for seated players. The spacing and layout of buttons and joysticks reflected iterative learning about human hand mechanics. Early games often placed buttons in simple, symmetrical layouts that looked neat but didn't necessarily match how hands naturally moved. Over time, manufacturers refined these layouts based on gameplay requirements and player feedback. 6-button fighting game layouts, for example, arranged buttons in staggered rows that matched the natural arc of finger movement, allowing for rapid inputs without excessive hand repositioning. Joystick height and resistance were carefully calibrated, though not always consistently across different manufacturers. A joystick that was too stiff required excessive force to operate, causing hand fatigue. One that was too loose lacked precision, frustrating players during crucial moments. The optimal resistance provided enough feedback to give players a sense of control without requiring exhausting force. The joystick's throw, the distance it moved in, each direction also mattered. Too much throw meant slower inputs. Too little made precise control difficult. Manufacturers experimented with different combinations to find what worked best for different game types. Button design evolved significantly during the arcade era. Early buttons were often simple microswitches, reliable but requiring relatively high activation force. As competitive play became more common, especially in fighting games, manufacturers developed buttons with lighter actuation, allowing for faster inputs. The tactile feedback from button presses, that satisfying click when a button was pressed, wasn't just satisfying, it provided crucial information to players, confirming that their input had been registered without requiring them to look away from the screen. The monitor position and angle underwent continuous refinement. Monitors were typically mounted at a slight backward tilt, usually 5 to 15 degrees from vertical. This tilt reduced glare from overhead lighting and positioned the screen more directly in the player's line of sight. The distance from the player's typical position to the screen was carefully considered. Too close, and the screen dominated the peripheral vision uncomfortably. Too far, and fine details became hard to see. The typical distance of 18 to 24 inches represented a compromise that worked for most players and game types. Monitor size itself involved trade-offs. Larger monitors provided more immersive visuals and made details easier to see but increased the weight of the cabinet, consumed more power, and cost more to manufacture and replace. Most arcade cabinets settled on 19 or 25-inch monitors as offering the best balance. Some games, particularly those emphasizing spectacle, like Dragon's Lair with its laserdisc graphics, used larger monitors to showcase their visual capabilities, accepting the additional costs as part of their premium positioning. The physical durability of cabinet components wasn't just about longevity. It was about maintaining the gameplay experience over time. A joystick that became loose or unresponsive after weeks of heavy use compromised the game's playability and frustrated players. Buttons that stuck or failed to register inputs reliably turned challenging games into impossible ones. Manufacturers learned to use more robust components in high-wear areas, implementing metal reinforcements, heavy-duty switches, and sealed mechanisms that could resist dirt, spilled drinks, and aggressive handling. Maintenance accessibility became a crucial design consideration as the arcade industry matured. Arcade operators needed to service machines quickly to minimize downtime and lost revenue. well-designed cabinets featured easily removable control panels held in place by simple latches or bolts, allowing technicians to access the wiring and switches underneath without disassembling half the cabinet. Circuit boards were mounted in accessible locations with clear labeling. Monitor chassis, while requiring careful handling due to high voltages, were positioned to allow replacement without removing dozens of other components first. The coin mechanism area required special attention to both durability and security. Coin slots were subjected to incredible abuse, from players inserting the wrong coins to deliberate attempts to cheat the system using slugs or foreign currency. The coin door itself needed to be sturdy enough to resist break-in attempts while remaining easy for operators to open with the proper key. The coin box had to be large enough to avoid constant emptying, but not so large that it became a tempting target for theft. Some manufacturers developed elaborate security features, including alarms that sounded if the coin door was opened without first deactivating a hidden switch. Ventilation design evolved as cabinets became more sophisticated. Early machines with simple circuit boards generated moderate heat, easily managed with basic vents. But as games grew more complex, incorporating multiple boards, sound amplifiers, and sometimes additional hardware like laserdisc players, heat management became critical. Inadequate ventilation could lead to component failure, screen burn-in, or even fire hazards. Engineers developed ventilation systems that promoted natural convection, with intake vents at the bottom pulling in cool air and exhaust vents at the top allowing hot air to escape, all while preventing ambient light from leaking in and washing out the screen. Weight distribution was another subtle but important consideration. A top-heavy cabinet could become unstable, risking injury if it tipped forward. But cabinets also needed to be heavy enough that players couldn't easily rock or move them during intense gameplay. Manufacturers achieved this balance by positioning the heaviest components, usually the monitor and transformer, low in the cabinet and ensuring the base had a wide enough footprint to maintain stability. Some cabinets included adjustable feet that could be leveled on uneven floors, preventing wobbling that could distract players or accelerate wear on internal components. Trackball-equipped games like Centipede and Missile Command presented unique ergonomic challenges. The trackball needed to be positioned where players could comfortably spin it with their entire hand or fingertips, requiring a different panel geometry than joystick games. The trackball itself had to be large enough for comfortable control, but not so large that precise movements became difficult. It needed to spin freely but with enough friction to provide control, and the optical or mechanical sensors tracking its rotation had to be reliable and responsive. Spinner controls used in games like Tempest and Arkanoid had their own requirements. These rotary controllers needed smooth, continuous rotation without sticking or binding. The mechanical linkage between the physical spinner and the game's input system had to translate rotation accurately without lag or dead zones. Some spinners incorporated weighted flywheels that added inertia, allowing skilled players to spin the control and have it continue rotating briefly, enabling rapid movements that would be impossible with direct one-to-one tracking. Steering wheel games demanded perhaps the most sophisticated ergonomic engineering. The wheel needed to turn smoothly but provide enough resistance to feel realistic. The pedals had to be positioned so players could operate them comfortably without sliding in their seat or straining their legs. Some advanced racing cabinets incorporated force feedback, where the wheel would resist turning or vibrate in response to game events, adding another layer of mechanical complexity while enhancing immersion. The entire cockpit-style seating area had to be comfortable for players of different sizes, while remaining compact enough to be viable in arcade environments. Flight simulator cabinets, like those for games such as Star Wars and Afterburner, pushed ergonomic design further. These games often used yoke controllers or flight sticks that needed to move in multiple axes simultaneously. Some cabinets incorporated motion, physically tilting or rotating to simulate flight dynamics. These mechanical systems had to be smooth, responsive, and safe, with limits preventing excessive movement that could jar or injure players. The engineering challenges were substantial, essentially requiring cabinet designers to become mechanical engineers as well. Light gun games required their own ergonomic considerations. The gun needed to be comfortable to hold and aim, with weight distribution that didn't cause fatigue during extended play. The cable connecting the gun to the cabinet had to be long enough to allow free movement, but not so long that it created a tripping hazard. The mounting system had to hold the gun securely when not in use, but release it smoothly when a player grabbed it. The recoil mechanism, which provided haptic feedback when firing, had to feel satisfying without being jarring or painful. By the mid-1980s, the best arcade cabinets represented a sophisticated synthesis of engineering disciplines. Mechanical engineering ensured structural integrity and reliable control mechanisms. Electrical engineering managed power distribution, signal processing, and component integration. Industrial design balanced aesthetics with functionality. And ergonomic engineering, while not always explicitly named as such, ensured that players could comfortably interact with these machines for hours. The results weren't always perfect, but they represented genuine attempts to optimize the physical experience of gaming in ways that home consoles of the era simply couldn't match. These ergonomic and engineering considerations weren't just technical details. They directly impacted gameplay. A well-designed cabinet with responsive controls and comfortable positioning allowed players to perform at their best, executing complex maneuvers and achieving higher scores. A poorly designed cabinet frustrated even skilled players, creating artificial difficulty that had nothing to do with the game itself. The best cabinets became transparent, allowing players to forget about the physical interface and lose themselves in the game. And that transparency, that seamless connection between player intent and game response, represented the ultimate achievement of arcade cabinet engineering. As home video game consoles grew more sophisticated throughout the 1980s, the arcade industry faced an existential challenge. The Nintendo Entertainment System, released in North America in 1985, brought arcade-quality graphics into living rooms. The Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo that followed pushed home gaming even further. Suddenly players had alternatives to spending quarters in often dingy arcades. The arcade industry's response shaped cabinet design in profound ways, driving both innovation and consolidation. The concept of dedicated versus convertible cabinets became increasingly important during this transitional period. Early arcade games had been housed in dedicated cabinets designed specifically for that title. Space Invaders came in its distinctive cabinet. Pac-Man had its own unique enclosure. This approach worked well when games had long profitable lifespans, but as the market became saturated and game popularity became more volatile, operators needed flexibility. Convertible or conversion kits emerged as a practical solution. These kits allowed operators to update older cabinets with new games, replacing the circuit board, marquee, side art, control panel overlay, and sometimes the controls themselves. A cabinet that had housed Galaxian could become Galaga. An aging Pac-Man machine could be reborn as Ms. Pac-Man. This approach saved operators the substantial cost of purchasing entirely new cabinets while keeping their arcade fresh with current titles. The design implications were significant. Cabinets intended for conversion needed to be more generic and adaptable. Instead of the highly specific game-themed aesthetics of dedicated cabinets, conversion-ready cabinets often featured more neutral designs. Black or wood grain finishes predominated, with side art panels designed to be easily removed and replaced. Control panels were modular, allowing for swapping between joystick configurations, button layouts, and alternative controls. Even the monitor mounting might be adjustable to accommodate different display requirements. Some manufacturers formalized this approach with standardized platforms. The JAMA standard, established in 1985, stood for Japan Amusement Machinery Manufacturers Association. It defined a standardized edge connector for arcade circuit boards, allowing any JAMA-compliant game to work in any JAMA-compliant cabinet with minimal modification. This standardization revolutionized arcade operations, making conversions faster, cheaper, and more reliable. It also influenced cabinet design, encouraging more generic modular construction that could accommodate a wide range of games. Two-player cabinets evolved to meet the growing demand for social gaming experiences. While early two-player games often simply had two sets of controls on a single upright cabinet, later designs became more sophisticated. Side-by-side configurations positioned two complete control sets on a wider panel, allowing players to stand next to each other. This arrangement worked well for competitive games where players wanted to watch each other's screens, or for cooperative games where communication was important. Some two-player cabinets used cocktail or tabletop configurations, where the monitor faced upward from a table-like surface with controls on opposite sides. Players sat or stood on opposite sides of the table looking down at the screen. The image would flip depending on which player's turn it was, ensuring each player had an upright view. These cocktail cabinets were space-efficient and created a more intimate social gaming experience, though they never achieved the popularity of traditional upright cabinets in American arcades. They found more success in bars and lounges where the table-like form factor fit the environment better. Racing games drove some of the most dramatic cabinet design innovations. Early racing games like Grand Track 10 had featured basic sit-down cabinets, but as racing games grew more sophisticated, so did their cabinets. Pole Position, released by Namco in 1982, popularized the sit-down racing cabinet with its cockpit-style design. Players sat in a molded seat surrounded by a partial enclosure, with a steering wheel mounted in front and pedals below. The monitor was positioned to simulate looking through a windshield. This configuration provided unprecedented immersion, making players feel like they were actually driving a race car. Outrun, released by Sega in 1986, took the racing cabinet even further with its deluxe hydraulic motion cabinet. The entire cockpit could tilt and shake in response to game events, simulating the G-forces of acceleration, braking, and cornering. This required substantial engineering, with hydraulic or pneumatic systems, sensors to track game state, and safety mechanisms to prevent excessive or dangerous movement. The Deluxe Outrun cabinet was expensive to manufacture and maintain, but it offered an experience that home consoles simply couldn't replicate, justifying its premium positioning. Light gun games similarly demanded specialized cabinet designs. Operation Wolf, released by Taito in 1987, used a mounted machine gun controller rather than a handheld light gun. The gun was attached to the cabinet by an articulated arm, allowing it to swivel and elevate while remaining tethered. This design solved several problems simultaneously. It prevented gun theft, ensured the gun was always available for the next player, and allowed for a larger, heavier controller with more satisfying recoil effects. The cabinet itself often featured military or action-themed artwork, and sometimes included environmental details like sandbags or camouflage patterns. fighter jet simulation cabinets represented the pinnacle of specialized design. Afterburner, also from Sega in 1987, featured a deluxe cabinet that completely enclosed the player in a cockpit that could rotate 360 degrees. The entire assembly would bank, pitch, and roll in sync with the on-screen action, creating a visceral sensation of flight. These cabinets were essentially small theme park rides, requiring extensive mechanical engineering, safety testing, and maintenance. They were expensive investments, but their spectacle value was undeniable, often serving as marquee attractions that drew players into arcades. The rise of fighting games in the early 1990s brought new considerations to cabinet design. Street Fighter II, released by Capcom in 1991, popularized the head-to-head fighting game format. These games required two complete sets of controls, typically with complex button layouts featuring 6 or more buttons, per player arranged in specific patterns. The control panel for a Street Fighter II cabinet was notably wide to accommodate both players with adequate space, and the button layouts were carefully designed to support the game's intricate move list. Fighting game cabinets often featured additional innovations to support competitive play. Some included barriers or dividers between the two control sets, providing a small degree of privacy or preventing players from easily glancing at their opponent's hands. The monitors were often larger than standard arcade monitors to ensure both players could clearly see the action. Some deluxe versions included enhanced sound systems with additional speakers, creating a more dramatic audio environment for the intense matches, versus cabinets for fighting games sometimes used dual monitor configurations, with separate screens for each player positioned side by side or stacked vertically. While this configuration never became standard due to cost and complexity, it represented an attempt to give each player their own optimal viewing position and eliminate any competitive advantage from screen position. These experimental designs showed the lengths manufacturers would go to create ideal competitive gaming environments. Puzzle games and skill games carved out their own niche in cabinet design. These games, often targeting broader demographics than action games, sometimes used more approachable, less intimidating cabinet designs. Tetris cabinets, for instance, might feature bright colours and friendly aesthetics, rather than the aggressive imagery of shooter games. Some puzzle game cabinets were designed to be space-efficient, with smaller footprints suitable for locations like grocery stores or restaurants, where floor space was at a premium. Redemption games, which dispensed tickets that could be exchanged for prizes, required their own specialized cabinets. These machines needed to store rolls of tickets, include ticket dispensing mechanisms, and often featured large, attention-grabbing designs with lights and sounds to attract players. While these weren't video game cabinets in the traditional sense, they coexisted in many arcade environments and influenced the overall design language of coin-operated amusements. By the mid-1990s, the arcade industry in North America was in decline. Home consoles had reached parity with arcade graphics in many genres, and the social landscape was changing. Teenagers who had previously spent hours in arcades were now playing multiplayer games at home or online. The arcade business model, dependent on constant foot traffic and quarter feeding, struggled to compete with the convenience and cost-effectiveness of home gaming. This decline impacted cabinet design in subtle ways. Manufacturers became more conservative, investing less in elaborate custom cabinets and more in standard configurations that could be easily converted. The Golden Age's explosion of creativity in cabinet aesthetics gave way to more uniform generic designs. Many later arcade games were released in standardized cabinets with only marquee and side art differentiating them. The era of games receiving completely unique, purpose-built cabinets was largely over. However, certain genres remained arcade strongholds, and their cabinets reflected this. Fighting games continued to thrive in arcades longer than most other genres, supported by their competitive nature and social dynamics. Dance Dance Revolution and other rhythm games emerged in the late 1990s with completely novel control schemes that couldn't be replicated effectively at home, giving them prolonged arcade relevance. These games use specialized platforms, arrow pads, and dance surfaces that required substantial cabinet real estate and engineering. The transition from CRT monitors to LCD displays, beginning in the early 2000s, brought its own changes to cabinet design. LCD panels were lighter, thinner, and consumed less power than CRTs, allowing for more flexible mounting options and reduced heat management requirements. However, early LCDs had response time and viewing angle limitations that made them controversial among hardcore players. Cabinet designers had to balance the practical advantages of LCDs against the potential impact on gameplay experience and player perception. By the mid-2000s, the arcade landscape had transformed completely. The neighborhood arcade, once a ubiquitous gathering place, had largely disappeared in North America. Surviving arcades tended to be either upscale entertainment centers with the latest technology or retro-focused venues catering to nostalgia. New arcade cabinets, when they appeared, were often elaborate, expensive affairs offering experiences impossible to replicate at home, specialized racing simulators, elaborate shooting galleries, or social rhythm games. The era of simple upright cabinets housing cutting-edge video games had passed into history. Yet even as the industry contracted, the physical cabinets themselves began to take on new significance. What had once been merely containers for games were now recognized as historical artifacts, physical embodiments of a vanished cultural phenomenon. The cabinets that had attracted quarters in dim arcades were now attracting collectors, restorers, and historians who recognized their value not just as gaming platforms, but as design objects, technological artifacts, and cultural touchstones. In 2025, the arcade cabinets of the 1980s and 90s occupy a unique place in gaming culture. They're simultaneously obsolete technology and treasured historical artifacts. The physical cabinets, once so ubiquitous they were nearly invisible, have become valuable collectibles sought by enthusiasts worldwide. This transformation from disposable commercial equipment to cherished antiques reveals how our relationship with gaming history has evolved. The collector's market for original arcade cabinets has grown steadily since the late 1990s. What began with a handful of nostalgic gamers rescuing abandoned machines from warehouses and closed arcades has become a thriving community of collectors, restorers, and historians. Original cabinets for landmark games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, or Street Fighter II can command significant prices, especially in good condition with original artwork intact. Rare or unusual variants, limited regional releases, or cabinets with unique features can sell for thousands of dollars. Restoration has become an art form in itself. Dedicated restorers work to return aged cabinets to their original glory, a process that can be extraordinarily complex. Side art may need to be reproduced from high-resolution scans of original decals, matched to exact color specifications, and professionally printed. Control panels might require complete rebuilding with period-correct parts. Monitors need to be refurbished or replaced with appropriate alternatives. Even finding the correct screws, edge molding, or T-molding can become a quest for authenticity. The preservation community has developed extensive documentation of original cabinet specifications, Online databases catalogue everything from exact paint colours to wood thicknesses to wiring harnesses. High-resolution scans of original artwork are shared, allowing restorers to recreate faded or damaged graphics. Parts suppliers have emerged specifically serving the restoration market, manufacturing reproduction components that match original specifications. This infrastructure has made restoration increasingly accessible, though it remains labour-intensive and expensive. Some preservationists focus on maintaining cabinets in working order, keeping original components functional through careful maintenance and period-appropriate repairs. Others take a more pragmatic approach, accepting modern replacements and modifications if they maintain the cabinet's appearance and functionality. The debate between purist restoration and practical preservation reflects broader questions about how we preserve technological history. Museums and exhibitions have increasingly recognized arcade cabinets as significant cultural artifacts. Several museums now maintain collections of important arcade games in their original cabinets. These displays serve multiple purposes. They preserve physical examples of historical technology. They provide context for understanding how games were originally experienced, and they allow newer generations to physically interact with gaming history. The experiential aspect matters. Playing Pac-Man on a smartphone isn't the same as standing in front of the original cabinet, hands on the ball-top joystick, the maze filling your field of vision. The modern retro arcade, operating as a business in the 2020s, represents an interesting hybrid of preservation and entertainment. These venues, which have emerged in various cities, offer collections of original arcade cabinets, usually set to free play. They generate revenue through admission fees or food and beverage sales rather than coin operation. This model allows them to maintain authentic equipment while creating viable businesses. For many players, these venues offer their first experience with original arcade cabinets, introducing physical gaming history to those too young to have experienced the arcade era firsthand. Home arcade culture has flourished alongside cabinet preservation. The concept of the home arcade, a dedicated space filled with restored original cabinets or quality reproductions, has gone from unusual to aspirational among gaming enthusiasts. Dedicated collectors build climate-controlled game rooms housing dozens of cabinets. Others may have one or two prize machines, centerpieces of their gaming setup. The physicality of these cabinets, their substantial presence and tactile controls, offers something distinct from software emulation or modern controllers. The reproduction market has evolved to serve home arcade enthusiasts who want the experience of original cabinets without the cost or rarity concerns of authentic hardware. Several companies manufacture reproduction cabinets, some focusing on faithful recreations of specific classic games, others producing generic cabinets that can run multiple games through emulation. The quality of these reproductions varies dramatically, from cheap, undersized versions with poor controls to meticulously crafted units that match or exceed original specifications. Multi-game arcade cabinets, sometimes called multicades, have become popular in the home market. These cabinets house computers or specialized boards running emulation software, allowing a single cabinet to play hundreds or thousands of classic games. While purists criticize these as inauthentic, they serve a practical purpose, allowing enthusiasts to access extensive game libraries without needing dozens of cabinets. The challenge with multicades is accommodating the different control requirements of various games. A cabinet optimized for Pac-Man won't feel right for Street Fighter II, and neither will suit Centipede. Some multicades attempt universal control layouts that compromise for compatibility while others allow for swappable control panels. The DIY cabinet building community has grown significantly with the availability of detailed plans, components, and online support. Enthusiasts with woodworking skills can build their own cabinets from scratch, customizing every aspect to their preferences. Projects range from simple bar-top cabinets small enough to sit on furniture to full-size uprights indistinguishable from commercial hardware. The satisfaction of building your own cabinet, combined with the potential cost savings, drives this community. Detailed build logs, video tutorials, and forum discussions provide guidance for every skill level. Modern indie game developers have occasionally embraced arcade cabinet releases. Some independent games are released as full arcade machines, complete with custom cabinets, as limited edition physical releases. These modern arcade machines blend contemporary game design with classic cabinet aesthetics, creating interesting hybrids. They're typically produced in small numbers and sold to collectors or specialized venues rather than traditional arcades. These releases acknowledge that the cabinet itself, as a designed object and experiential platform, retains value and appeal. The aesthetic influence of arcade cabinets extends beyond physical recreations. Video game art and graphic design frequently reference arcade cabinet artwork, side art, and marquees. The visual language developed during the arcade era, bold colors, dynamic character artwork, eye-catching logos, continues to influence how games are marketed and presented. Even purely digital games may use frame elements or menu designs that evoke the look of arcade cabinets, tapping into the nostalgia and recognition those designs carry. Virtual reality has created interesting opportunities for arcade cabinet preservation and recreation. Some VR games recreate entire arcade environments, allowing users to virtually stand in front of meticulously modeled arcade cabinets. These virtual arcades serve as both preservation efforts, documenting the appearance and atmosphere of arcades, and as experiential art projects that explore the meaning and memory of these spaces. While they can't replicate the tactile experience of original hardware, they can preserve visual and spatial aspects that photographs and video alone cannot capture. The community aspect of arcade preservation shouldn't be underestimated. Online forums, local collecting groups, and arcade gaming conventions create spaces where enthusiasts can share knowledge, trade parts, show off restorations, and collectively preserve institutional memory about arcade history. Older collectors who experienced the arcade era firsthand share stories and details with newer enthusiasts, passing along not just technical information but cultural context. These communities function as living archives, repositories of knowledge that hasn't been formally documented elsewhere. Some preservationists are racing against time to document and save what remains. Every year, more original cabinets are lost to deterioration, disposal, or modification. Warehouse finds of new old stock cabinets become rarer. People who worked in the arcade industry during its heyday are aging, and their first-hand knowledge represents an irreplaceable resource. Oral history projects and documentation efforts attempt to capture this knowledge before it's lost. High-resolution photography and 3D scanning of cabinets create digital archives that can inform future restorations even if original examples are lost. The question of what to preserve becomes philosophically complex. Should a cabinet restored with reproduction artwork be considered authentic? What about a cabinet with replaced circuit boards running the original game from different hardware? If a cabinet's wood has been completely rebuilt but uses the original artwork and controls, is it still the same cabinet? These aren't abstract questions for preservationists. They involve real decisions about time, money, and authenticity. The answers often depend on the preservationist's goals, whether they prioritize historical accuracy, functional gameplay, or aesthetic appearance. Modern arcade venues, even those focused on contemporary games, sometimes draw design inspiration from classic cabinets. The form factor of upright cabinets, the concept of dedicated hardware for each game, and the physical presence of gaming machines remain relevant even in an era dominated by networked digital distribution. Some new arcade games are released in striking custom cabinets that echo the Golden Age's emphasis on cabinet design as integral to the gaming experience. The enduring appeal of arcade cabinets speaks to something fundamental about how we relate to games and gaming history. These machines represent a specific moment in technological and cultural evolution when games were public, social experiences rather than private domestic ones. They embody a different economic model, where gameplay was precious and limited rather than infinite and owned. And they represent a level of industrial design attention and craft that modern gaming hardware, optimized for mass production and cost efficiency, rarely matches. For those who experienced arcade gaming in its heyday, restored cabinets provide powerful nostalgia triggers, physical time machines that can evoke memories and emotions in ways that software emulation alone cannot. For younger players discovering these machines, they offer tactile, spatial experiences distinct from modern gaming. The physical commitment of standing at a cabinet, the mechanical resistance of the controls, the cathode, ray glow of the monitor all contribute to an experience that feels fundamentally different from gaming on modern devices. Looking forward, the future of arcade cabinet preservation and appreciation seems secure, at least within enthusiast communities. The infrastructure for restoration continues to improve, with better documentation, parts availability, and shared knowledge. Museums and cultural institutions increasingly recognize arcade games as worthy of preservation, and new generations continue to discover these machines, drawn by their aesthetic appeal, historical significance, or simply the unique gameplay experience they offer. The arcade cabinets that once lined dim rooms, designed to extract quarters and deliver brief moments of excitement, have transcended their original purpose. They've become artifacts, art objects, and touchstones for entire generations. Their preservation represents more than just saving old electronics. It's about maintaining physical connections to our cultural history, keeping alive experiences and memories that might otherwise exist only in increasingly vague recollection. The story of arcade cabinet design isn't complete without understanding how these machines were actually built. The manufacturing processes, material choices, and production techniques evolved significantly across the arcade era, driven by changing economics, technological capabilities, and industry maturation. These practical considerations shaped what was possible in cabinet design, often in ways invisible to players, but crucial to manufacturers and operators. In the earliest days of video arcade games, cabinet manufacturing was often surprisingly small-scale and improvised. Many early game companies were startups operating out of garages or small facilities. They contracted with local cabinet makers or furniture manufacturers who adapted their existing capabilities to produce game housings. This meant that early cabinets often used whatever materials and construction methods were readily available, rather than being optimized specifically for arcade use. Plywood remained the dominant material throughout the arcade era, but the specific types and qualities evolved. Early cabinets might use whatever 3/4-inch plywood was affordable and available. As the industry matured, manufacturers began specifying particular grades and types. Birch plywood became popular for its strength and smooth surfaces, which took laminate and paint well. Some manufacturers used marine plywood for certain components, appreciating its water resistance for cabinets destined for diverse environments where humidity or spills were concerns. Particle board and medium-density fiberboard found limited use in arcade cabinets. These engineered wood products were cheaper than plywood but less durable and more prone to damage from moisture. Some manufacturers used them for non-structural panels or internal components where cost savings mattered more than longevity. The base of cabinets, which supported substantial weight and anchored the entire structure, typically remained plywood or solid wood for reliability. The evolution of cabinet finishing materials reflects both changing aesthetics and improving technology. Early cabinets often used simple laminate sheets heat-pressed onto the plywood surfaces. These laminates came in limited colors and patterns, usually solid blacks, wood grains, or simple geometric designs. They were durable and easy to clean, making them practical for commercial use, but they limited visual variety. As vinyl printing technology improved, printed vinyl became more common for applying decorative graphics. This allowed for full-color artwork while maintaining durability. The introduction of high-quality vinyl decals revolutionized cabinet decoration. By the late 70s, manufacturers could produce vibrant, detailed graphics on vinyl sheets that were applied to cabinet sides after basic construction. This separated the structural assembly from the artistic finishing, allowing for more flexibility. A cabinet maker could produce bare cabinets in bulk, then apply game-specific artwork depending on which titles were in production. The vinyl needed to be thick enough to be durable, but thin enough to conform to the cabinet's surface without bubbling or wrinkling. Printing technology for cabinet artwork advanced from simple screen printing to sophisticated offset and digital printing. Screen printing allowed for vibrant colors, but was limited in detail and required separate screens for each color layer. Offset printing offered more detail and color accuracy, but required longer setup times and larger print runs to be economical. By the 1990s, early digital printing began appearing, offering unprecedented flexibility and small-run production, though early systems couldn't match the color vibrancy and durability of established methods. The protective coatings applied over artwork were crucial to longevity. Clear laminate layers protected the underlying graphics from scratches, UV fading, and moisture. The quality of this lamination varied significantly, with cheaper applications peeling at edges or yellowing over time, while professional-grade laminations could keep artwork pristine for decades. Some manufacturers experimented with liquid coatings, spray-on urethanes that provided durable protection, though these required careful application to avoid runs, bubbles, or uneven finishes. Edge molding and trim pieces served both aesthetic and protective functions. The exposed edges of plywood panels were vulnerable to damage and looked unfinished. T-molding, a rubber or vinyl trim piece shaped like an uppercase T in cross-section, fit into rooted slots along cabinet edges, covering raw wood and providing a finished appearance. This trim came in various colors, allowing manufacturers to coordinate or contrast with the cabinet's overall design. The T-molding also provided a slightly cushioned edge that was more comfortable and safer than exposed wood. Corner treatments range from simple rounded edges cut with routers to elaborate metal corner guards on higher-end cabinets. These corners took the most abuse during transport and setup, making reinforcement practical. Metal corners, while adding cost and weight, significantly extended cabinet life in commercial environments. Some manufacturers used heavy-duty plastic corner protectors as a middle ground between bare wood and metal. The joining methods in cabinet construction reflected the balance between cost, speed, and quality. The simplest cabinets used butt joints with screws and glue, assembling quickly but lacking the strength of more sophisticated joinery. Mid-range cabinets might use dado joints, where one panel fits into a groove cut in another, providing more contact area and mechanical resistance. High-end or specialized cabinets occasionally used more complex joinery, though this was rare given the cost pressures of commercial manufacturing. Internal reinforcements provided crucial structural support without being visible to players. Wooden cleats screwed to the inside corners where panels met, essentially creating internal corner braces, significantly improved rigidity. Some manufacturers used metal angle brackets at critical junctions. The monitor mount, often a wooden or metal shelf securely fastened to multiple cabinet panels, needed particular attention to support the monitor's substantial weight without sagging or vibrating. The evolution of control panel construction deserves particular attention given its importance to gameplay. Early control panels were often simple plywood sheets with holes drilled for joysticks and buttons. A printed or laminated overlay covered the surface, providing artwork and button labels. This overlay needed to be durable enough to resist scratching and fading from constant hand contact. Some manufacturers used metal control panels for added durability, though these were heavier and more expensive. More sophisticated control panels used layered construction. A metal base plate provided structural rigidity and mounting points for controls. A plywood or plastic overlay sat above this, with the printed artwork. Some designs included a clear acrylic or polycarbonate sheet over the artwork, providing protection while allowing the graphics to show through. This clear layer could be replaced if it became too scratched, refreshing the panel's appearance without requiring complete replacement. The mounting of controls within the panel involved careful consideration. Buttons needed to be securely mounted with enough threading to accommodate the panel thickness and washers or mounting nuts. Joysticks required sturdy base plates and precise hole sizes to prevent wobbling or binding. The wiring from these controls to the game board needed to be organized and secured to prevent shorts or disconnections during maintenance. Monitor mounting systems evolved from simple wooden shelves to adjustable metal brackets. Early systems often used wooden cleats or platforms built into the cabinet structure, providing stable mounting but offering little adjustability. Later designs incorporated metal brackets with multiple mounting holes, allowing operators to adjust monitor position for optimal viewing angles. Some advanced systems used quick-release mechanisms, enabling faster monitor swaps during repairs or game conversions. The electrical systems within cabinets became increasingly sophisticated. Early games had relatively simple power requirements, just enough to run the circuit board and monitor. As games added sound systems, illuminated buttons, marquee lighting, and more complex electronics, power distribution became more complex. Cabinets needed proper transformers to step voltage up or down as needed, fuses or circuit breakers to prevent damage from shorts or surges, and organized wiring harnesses to connect all the components. Heat management, mentioned earlier in the ergonomics section, had direct implications for cabinet construction. Ventilation holes needed to be positioned carefully. Too close to the monitor, and they might let light leak in, washing out the screen. Too restricted, and components could overheat. The layout of internal components influenced airflow, with heat-generating elements positioned where natural convection would move hot air up and out through exhaust vents. Manufacturing scale influenced construction approaches. Companies producing hundreds or thousands of cabinets could invest in specialized equipment and jigs that ensured consistency and speed. A dedicated jig for cutting all the panels for a specific cabinet model guaranteed that every cabinet was identical, simplifying assembly and ensuring that parts like replacement panels could be manufactured later. Smaller manufacturers or those producing limited runs often used more general-purpose equipment, resulting in more variation between individual cabinets. Assembly line techniques became common as the industry matured. Instead of one person building an entire cabinet, specialized workers would each perform specific tasks: cutting panels, routing edges, applying laminate, installing hardware, wiring electronics. This division of labor increased efficiency, but required careful coordination and quality control to ensure completed cabinets met specifications. The assembly process typically moved from structural assembly to finishing to electronics installation to final testing. Quality control varied dramatically across manufacturers and time periods. Top-tier manufacturers implemented rigorous testing, running completed cabinets through extended play sessions to identify any issues before shipping. They might check alignment of all panels, tightness of all fasteners, function of all controls, and stability of the cabinet on uneven surfaces. Budget manufacturers might perform only cursory checks, shipping cabinets that would develop problems after a few weeks in operation. Operators learned which manufacturers produced reliable cabinets and which required frequent service. Shipping and packaging considerations influenced design choices that weren't obvious to end users. Cabinets needed to survive transportation from factory to distributor to operator, potentially traveling thousands of miles in trucks. Packaging typically involved cardboard corner protectors, stretch wrap, and wooden pallets. Some manufacturers designed cabinets with removable legs to reduce height during shipping, preventing damage from low clearances or unstable stacking. The weight of cabinets, typically between 100 and 300 pounds depending on configuration, required consideration for loading docks, doorways, and indoor transport. The economics of cabinet production shifted dramatically over the arcade era. In the early days, with high demand and limited competition, manufacturers could justify elaborate custom cabinets for individual games. As competition intensified and margins tightened, pressure grew to standardize and reduce costs. The shift toward convertible, cabinets, and generic designs reflected these economic realities. A manufacturer in the mid-1990s might produce a standardized cabinet design usable across multiple games, printing game-specific artwork as needed, but avoiding the tooling and setup costs of unique cabinet shapes. International manufacturing added complexity. Japanese manufacturers often built cabinets domestically, then shipped them internationally, but this added significant cost from shipping and import duties. Some games licensed for international distribution were repackaged in locally manufactured cabinets, particularly for the US market. This meant that the same game might appear in quite different cabinets depending on region, with different materials, construction methods, and aesthetics. The environmental impact of arcade cabinet manufacturing, while rarely discussed during the era, was considerable. The production required substantial amounts of wood products, plastics, metals, and electronic components. The finishing processes involved solvents, adhesives, and coatings with environmental implications, and the disposal of cabinets at end of life, whether through dumping, recycling, or abandonment, created waste management challenges. Modern restoration efforts, by extending cabinet lifespans decades beyond their original commercial use, represent an unintentional form of sustainability. The manufacturing story reveals how much of cabinet design was determined by practical constraints rather than pure creative choice. The materials available, the cost targets manufacturers needed to hit, the capabilities of their production facilities, and the realities of shipping and deployment all shaped what was possible. The best cabinet designs worked within these constraints, creatively, finding ways to achieve distinctive appearance and reliable function without exploding budgets. The worst designs either prioritized cost-cutting to the point of failure or pursued impractical aesthetics that couldn't survive real-world use. Understanding the manufacturing context helps explain why certain design choices became standard. Plywood construction with vinyl graphics wasn't the only possible approach, but it offered the best balance of cost, durability, appearance, and manufacturability for mass production. The standardization of dimensions and components wasn't just about convenience. It reflected the economic realities of an industry that needed to produce reliable products efficiently while remaining flexible enough to respond to rapidly changing market demands. The evolution of arcade cabinets wasn't uniform across the globe. Perhaps nowhere were the differences more pronounced than between Japanese and American approaches to cabinet design. These regional variations reflected differing cultural values, business models, and player expectations, creating parallel but distinct design traditions that occasionally intersected but never fully merged. Japanese arcade cabinets, particularly from major manufacturers like Namco, Taito, Sega, and Konami, often exhibited a refinement and attention to detail that distinguished them from American counterparts. Even in the earliest era, Japanese cabinets tended toward cleaner lines, more sophisticated finishes, and higher build quality. This wasn't merely aesthetic preference. It reflected the different business environments in which these cabinets operated. Japanese arcades, especially in urban centers, were often smaller, more densely packed spaces than American arcades. This encouraged more compact cabinet designs that maximized gameplay within minimal footprints. Japanese manufacturers developed narrower cabinet standards, candy cabinets named for their bright colors and compact size, that could fit more machines into limited floor space. These cabinets typically had smaller monitors, usually 19 inches compared to the 25-inch monitors common in American cabinets, and more streamlined profiles. The aesthetic philosophy differed notably. American cabinet art tended toward bold, aggressive imagery, with high contrast and dramatic compositions. Space battles, monsters, and action scenes dominated. Japanese cabinet art, while certainly capable of drama, more frequently featured cleaner graphic design, more sophisticated color palettes, and a greater emphasis on character artwork and branding. The differences reflected broader design sensibilities, visible across product design, advertising, and entertainment media in both cultures. Control layout preferences diverged between regions. Japanese arcade controls, particularly for fighting games that would become central to Japanese arcade culture, evolved into specific standards. The Sanwa and Seimitsu brands of joysticks and buttons became virtually universal in Japanese arcades, valued for their light, precise action. These controls felt quite different from American standard Hap controls, which had heavier, more mechanical feel. The Japanese preference for lighter, faster controls reflected gaming styles that emphasized rapid, precise inputs over forceful manipulations. The concept of the candy cabinet, while present in American arcades, never achieved the same dominance it held in Japan. These versatile, standardized cabinets could accept different game boards with minimal modification, making them ideal for the Japanese arcade business model, where game rotation was frequent and operators needed flexibility. The standardization meant that a Japanese arcade could update its offerings quickly, swapping game boards and marquees rather than moving entire cabinets. This approach encouraged rapid iteration and kept arcades fresh with new titles. Japanese arcade culture emphasized social gaming differently than American arcades. While American arcades certainly had competitive and social elements, Japanese arcades developed elaborate cultures around specific games, particularly fighting games. This led to cabinet features that supported competitive play, like movable or adjustable configurations that allowed players to position themselves optimally for head-to-head matches. Some Japanese arcades used bench-style arrangements where multiple candy cabinets were arrayed in rows, allowing spectators to easily gather and watch skilled players. The business relationships between manufacturers and operators differed regionally. In Japan, major game companies often operated their own arcades or had close relationships with arcade chains, creating vertical integration that allowed for experimentation with cabinet designs and rapid deployment of new concepts. In America, the relationship between manufacturers and independent operators was more arm's length, encouraging more conservative, proven designs that operators could trust to be reliable and profitable. Cigarette burns and drink spills, seemingly minor considerations, actually influenced design choices differently between regions. American arcade cabinets needed to be more resistant to abuse and neglect, leading to more durable but less refined finishing. Japanese arcades, with stricter behavioral norms and often stricter management, could use more delicate finishes and materials without the same risk of damage. This contributed to Japanese cabinets often appearing more pristine and carefully maintained than American equivalents. The evolution of sitting versus standing play showed regional differences. Japanese arcade culture more readily embraced sit-down cabinets for various game types, not just racing games. Candy cabinets were designed to be comfortable for seated play, with appropriate monitor heights and control positioning. American arcades remained more committed to standing play for most games, viewing sit-down cabinets as appropriate only for specific genres like driving or flying games, where the seating position enhanced simulation realism. When Japanese games were licensed for American distribution, they often received completely redesigned cabinets. Pac-Man's American cabinet, while still featuring the game's cheerful characters, had a different form factor and aesthetic than its Japanese original. Space Invaders similarly received an American cabinet redesign. These modifications reflected manufacturers' beliefs about what would appeal to American operators and players, though they sometimes misread the situation, Americanizing elements that didn't need changing or missing aspects that actually needed localization. The explosion of fighting games in the early 1990s highlighted these regional differences. Japanese fighting game cabinets emphasized clean, efficient designs that supported intense, prolonged competitive play. American operators, importing these games or using licensed versions, sometimes struggled to replicate the feel of Japanese arcade controls, leading to suboptimal gameplay experiences that frustrated serious players. This disconnect contributed to the thriving import market for Japanese control components. Cultural attitudes toward maintenance and presentation also diverged. Japanese arcades maintained their cabinets meticulously, with regular cleaning, prompt repairs, and attention to aesthetics. American arcades varied more wildly, from well-maintained facilities to neglected machines with broken controls, scratched monitors, and peeling artwork. These operational differences meant that identical cabinets could provide vastly different experiences depending on regional maintenance practices. The pricing models for arcade play influenced cabinet design indirectly. Japanese arcades often charged lower per-play fees than American arcades, encouraging longer play sessions and regular return visits. This meant cabinets needed to be comfortable for extended use, with better ergonomics and seating options. American arcades, with higher per-play costs, designed around shorter, more intense experiences where comfort for marathon sessions was less critical. European arcade cabinet design formed a third distinct tradition, though with less global influence than Japanese or American approaches. European cabinets sometimes borrowed from both major traditions while adding their own local variations. The European market was more fragmented, with different countries having distinct arcade cultures and preferences. This fragmentation prevented the development of as standardized a design vocabulary as emerged in Japan or America. The question of which regional approach was superior misses the point. Each evolved to suit its specific context, reflecting the physical environments, business models, cultural expectations, and player demographics of its region. Japanese cabinets optimized for dense urban arcades with frequent game rotation and serious competitive players. American cabinets optimized for larger spaces, longer cabinet life cycles, and broader, more casual audiences. Both traditions produced iconic designs and influential innovations. Cross-pollination between these traditions occurred but faced challenges. American manufacturers studied Japanese designs, sometimes adopting elements they felt would work in American contexts. Japanese manufacturers, seeking American market share, tried to understand American preferences and adapt accordingly. But complete convergence never happened because the underlying context remained different. A cabinet design optimized for Tokyo's packed gaming centers wouldn't necessarily work in a suburban American mall arcade, and vice versa. Modern cabinet restoration and collection reflects these regional differences. Collectors often specialize in one regional tradition, drawn by particular aesthetic or functional preferences. Japanese cabinet collectors prize the refinement and control quality of candy cabinets. American cabinet collectors value the bold artwork and nostalgic appeal of the classics they remember from childhood. The preservation community has had to document both traditions separately, as standards, components, and construction details differ significantly. The legacy of these regional differences extends to modern game development and design. Contemporary arcade-style games, whether released as actual arcade machines or designed with arcade sensibilities, draw selectively from Japanese and American traditions. Some indie developers creating limited-run arcade releases deliberately evoke Japanese candy cabinet aesthetics. Others reference classic American upright cabinet designs. The choice communicates something about the game's identity and intended audience. Looking at Japanese and American cabinet design traditions side by side reveals how deeply design is embedded in cultural and contextual matrices. These cabinets weren't just boxes for electronics. They were products of specific times, places, and social contexts. Understanding these regional variations enriches our appreciation of arcade cabinet design as a discipline, showing how similar problems can yield different but equally valid solutions when approached from different cultural perspectives. The evolution of arcade cabinet design cannot be fully understood without examining how sound and visual technologies were integrated into the cabinet structure. These technical elements weren't mere additions to an otherwise complete design. They fundamentally shaped cabinet architecture, influenced player experience, and drove continuous innovation throughout the arcade era. The monitor represented the single most expensive and technically demanding component in most arcade cabinets. These cathode ray tube displays, the same technology used in televisions of the era, required careful integration. The monitor chassis, the assembly of electron guns, deflection coils, and control circuitry, generated significant heat and high voltages, creating safety and engineering challenges. Cabinet designers had to provide adequate ventilation, secure mounting that could support substantial weight, and shielding to prevent magnetic interference with nearby components. Monitor orientation, whether horizontal or vertical, dictated fundamental aspects of cabinet design. Most early arcade games used horizontal monitors matching television aspect ratios, but some games, particularly vertical scrolling shooters, used monitors rotated 90 degrees. This vertical orientation required different cabinet proportions to avoid wasted space and maintain appropriate viewing angles. Some cabinets included provisions to rotate monitors, though this was uncommon due to the complexity and weight involved. Color versus monochrome monitors represented a significant cost and capability divide in early arcade games. The first commercial arcade game, Computer Space, used a black and white television. Pong similarly used monochrome displays. The introduction of color monitors dramatically increased visual appeal, but also increased costs, power consumption, and heat generation. The transition to color as standard occurred gradually through the 1970s, with manufacturers weighing the increased appeal against the added expense. Vector graphics games like Tempest, Asteroids, and Battlezone used a completely different monitor technology. Instead of raster displays that painted the image line by line, vector monitors drew images directly by directing the electron beam in straight lines. This created incredibly sharp, bright graphics, but was limited to wireframe-style imagery. Vector monitors required different circuitry and maintenance compared to raster displays, and their unique visual quality influenced the aesthetic of games designed for them. The bright, crisp lines of vector graphics weren't just an artistic choice, they were inherent to the technology. The screen size choices reflected balancing multiple factors. Larger screens provided more immersive visuals but increased costs, weight, and power consumption. They also made cabinets bulkier and less space efficient. Smaller screens reduced costs but compromised visibility, especially in multiplayer situations where multiple players needed clear views. The industry settled around 19 and 25-inch diagonal screens as optimal compromises, though some special applications used larger or smaller displays. Bezel design around the monitor served both aesthetic and functional purposes. Functionally, the bezel concealed the monitor's edge circuitry and provided a smooth transition from the cabinet exterior to the display area. Aesthetically, bezels could extend the game's visual theme or include practical information like control instructions. Some bezels incorporated mirror effects or lighting elements. The bezel had to be removable for monitor access during maintenance, but secure enough not to rattle or become dislodged during play. Sound integration evolved from almost non-existent to sophisticated multi-speaker systems. Early arcade games had minimal or no sound. Pong featured simple beeps synthesized by analog circuitry and output through a small speaker. As games grew more complex, sound capabilities expanded. By the early 80s, arcade games featured elaborate synthesized music and sound effects that were crucial to their identity and appeal. Cabinet designers had to incorporate speakers, amplifiers, and sometimes soundboards, all while managing the acoustic environment. Speaker placement significantly affected the audio experience. Many cabinets placed a single speaker behind the bezel grille near the monitor, directing sound toward the player. This central placement made sense for mono audio and kept wiring simple. More elaborate cabinets used stereo speakers positioned to left and right, creating spatial audio effects. Some cabinets included additional speakers in the control panel area or even in the base of the cabinet, adding bass response or environmental sound effects. The acoustic properties of the cabinet itself mattered more than many manufacturers initially realized. A cabinet was essentially a large wooden box, and its internal volume, panel materials and ventilation openings all affected how sound resonated and propagated. Thin panels might vibrate sympathetically at certain frequencies, creating unwanted rattles or boomy bass. Strategic internal bracing could dampen these resonances. Some manufacturers used acoustic dampening materials, though this added cost and complexity. Volume control was surprisingly contentious. Operators wanted control over sound levels, both to set appropriate volumes for their specific environments and to reduce noise complaints from neighbours. But players sometimes wanted louder sound for greater immersion. Many cabinets included volume knobs accessible through service panels, allowing operators to set maximum levels. Some included external volume controls that players could adjust, though this risked players cranking volumes to uncomfortable or damaging levels. The integration of lighting elements added visual dynamism to cabinets. The marquee light, typically a fluorescent tube behind the translucent marquee panel, was nearly universal. But more elaborate cabinets incorporated additional lighting. Illuminated buttons that lit up when pressed provided visual feedback and enhanced the futuristic aesthetic many games sought. Strips of coloured lights along cabinet edges created attention-grabbing visual effects. Some cabinets included lighting effects that synchronized with gameplay events, flashing during explosions or special events. Fluorescent lighting technology had specific requirements. The ballast that regulated current to fluorescent tubes generated heat and occasional buzzing sounds. They needed secure mounting and proper ventilation. The tubes themselves had finite lifespans and would dim or fail over time, requiring operators to replace them to maintain the cabinet's visual appeal. Some cabinets used incandescent bulbs instead of fluorescent for certain applications, trading the efficiency and long life of fluorescent for the warmer colour and instant-on capability of incandescent. The electrical wiring harness within a cabinet became increasingly complex as games added more features. Early cabinets had relatively simple wiring: power to the monitor and circuit board, signals from the controls to the board. Later cabinets might include multiple voltage levels, audio signal routing, lighting circuits, and data connections for newer peripherals. Proper wire management prevented shorts, reduced interference, and made servicing easier. Well-designed cabinets used wire looms, cable ties, and clear routing paths. Poorly designed cabinets became tangled messes that frustrated technicians. Power supply requirements grew alongside game complexity. Early games might need only 50 or 100 watts. Later games with colour monitors, elaborate sound systems, and additional hardware could require several hundred watts. The power supplies, typically switching mode designs by the mid-80s, needed adequate cooling and secure mounting. Many cabinets included line filters to reduce electrical noise and protect sensitive electronics from power fluctuations. The interaction between visual and audio elements created a holistic sensory experience that defined arcade gaming. The bright, colourful graphics pulling players' attention, the energetic sound effects and music creating excitement and urgency, and even the physical feedback from controls and the cabinet's presence, contributed to immersion that home systems of the era couldn't match. Cabinet designers who understood these interactions could create synergistic experiences where each element enhanced the others. Some games pushed technical integration to extremes. Dragon's Lair, using Laserdisc technology to deliver full-motion video, required elaborate integration of the Laserdisc player, control interface, and display system within the cabinet. The Laserdisc itself was a relatively delicate optical drive that needed protection from shock and vibration, careful temperature management, and regular maintenance. The visual quality it delivered was revolutionary for 1983. but the complexity and fragility of the system created ongoing challenges for operators. Diagnostic and test modes, built into most arcade games, required their own interface considerations. Service buttons or switches, typically inside the coin door or on the control panel, allowed operators and technicians to access these modes. The display and sound systems would present diagnostic information, test patterns, or configuration options. Well-designed diagnostic systems could speed repairs and adjustments, while poorly designed ones left technicians guessing. As arcade technology evolved toward the mid-1990s, some cabinets began incorporating features borrowed from home electronics. Stereo audio with distinct left and right channels created more immersive soundscapes. Some cabinets experimented with force feedback, using motors or solenoids to create physical sensations during gameplay. These additions required more sophisticated electronics and more careful integration, pushing cabinet design further into multidisciplinary engineering territory. The transition period when CRT technology began giving way to LCD displays created interesting hybrid cabinet designs. Early LCD panels couldn't match CRTs for response time, viewing angles, or color reproduction, but they offered advantages in weight, power consumption, and physical depth. Some manufacturers created cabinets that could accommodate either display technology, using adjustable mounting systems that worked with both the deep, heavy CRTs and the thin, light LCDs. This flexibility helped extend cabinet lifespans as display technology transitioned. The technical integration achievements of the arcade era, combining displays, sound systems, controls, lighting, and electronics into cohesive packages, represented genuine engineering accomplishments. These weren't computers with added peripherals. They were purpose-built systems where every component was selected and integrated to create optimal gaming experiences. The best cabinets made this complexity invisible, presenting players with machines that felt solid, responsive, and focused entirely on delivering gameplay. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through the evolution of arcade cabinet design. From the simple wooden boxes that housed Pong to the elaborate motion simulators that thrilled players with Afterburner, from the crude joystick and button layouts of the earliest games to the refined, responsive controls that fighting game competitors demanded from plain laminated surfaces to vibrant, iconic artwork that became part of gaming culture, we've traced a path of continuous innovation and refinement. These cabinets were never just containers. They were interactive monuments, carefully crafted to attract attention, provide comfort, deliver entertainment, and withstand the rigors of commercial operation. Every angle, every material choice, every component integration reflected decisions made by engineers, designers, artists, and manufacturers trying to balance countless competing demands. Create something eye-catching, but not too expensive. Make it durable, but still maintainable. Optimize it for player comfort, but keep it compact enough for crowded arcade floors. The story of arcade cabinet design is ultimately a story about finding solutions to complex problems within tight constraints. Limited budgets and materials dictated what was possible. Competitive pressures drove innovation in aesthetics and features. Operator feedback improved ergonomics and reliability. Player preferences shaped everything from control layouts to sound volumes. And through it all, the technology itself evolved, creating new possibilities and rendering old approaches obsolete. What strikes me most, reflecting on this history, is how seriously everyone took the challenge. These were commercial products designed to make money, yes, but they were also craft objects that received genuine care and attention. The artists who created cabinet artwork took pride in their designs. The engineers who solved control interface challenges took satisfaction in responsive, comfortable play. The manufacturers who refined their production techniques took quality seriously. This wasn't always true. There were certainly cost cutters and corner cutters. But the best of arcade cabinet design represented people doing excellent work under difficult conditions. The physical legacy of these cabinets remains scattered around the world. Some sit in museums, carefully preserved and displayed as cultural artifacts. Others fill the basements and garages of collectors who've rescued them from scrap heaps and warehouses. Still others languish in storage, waiting for someone to recognize their value and give them new life. And a few, miraculously, remain in service, delivering the same experiences they were built to provide decades ago. Their controls worn smooth by countless hands, their artwork faded but still recognizable, their circuit boards still processing inputs into outputs, into moments of challenge and triumph. For those who experienced the arcade era, these cabinets represent more than just gaming history. They're time machines that can transport us back to particular moments in our lives. The feel of that joystick, the glow of that monitor, the sound of those synthesized melodies all can evoke memories and emotions with startling vividness. They remind us of who we were when we first encountered them, the friends we played alongside, the challenges we overcame, the quarters we sacrificed to the coin slot's hungry mouth. For those discovering these cabinets now, without that nostalgia to colour their perception, they offer something different but equally valuable. They provide tactile, physical experiences that modern gaming, for all its technical sophistication, often lacks. They're substantial objects that occupy space, that demand your presence and attention, that can't be played while distracted by a phone or paused indefinitely. They remind us that games were once public, communal experiences rather than private, isolated ones. The design principles developed during the arcade era continue influencing how we think about game interfaces and experiences. The emphasis on responsive, precise controls echoes in debates about input lag and controller latency in modern gaming. The attention to ergonomics and player comfort informs how we design gaming furniture and accessories. The integration of audio and visual elements into cohesive experiences guides multimedia design across platforms. Even the bold, eye-catching aesthetic approaches pioneered by arcade cabinet artists can be seen in contemporary game marketing and presentation. What would those early cabinet builders and designers think if they could see how their work is regarded today? Would they be surprised that machines they expected to have 5-year operational lives are being carefully restored 40 years later? Would they be pleased that their design solutions are studied and documented? Would they be amused that details they never expected anyone to notice are now examined and debated by enthusiasts? Probably all of those things. They were solving immediate problems for commercial clients. That their solutions would become historically significant, aesthetically influential, and culturally meaningful probably never entered their minds. Yet that's exactly what happened. Through the accident of timing, being present at the birth of a new entertainment medium, these cabinet designers helped define what video games could be. They established vocabularies of form and function that persist decades later. They created objects that transcended their commercial origins to become cultural touchstones. And they did it while wrestling with plywood, vinyl, CRT monitors, and microswitches, translating abstract concepts like fun and challenge into physical reality. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of arcade cabinets, rows of them stretching into the distance, each one glowing with its own light, each one calling with its own music and sound effects. You'll walk among them, hands trailing across their smooth sides, fingers resting briefly on worn controls, and maybe, in that dream state where past and present merge, you'll realize that these machines, these carefully crafted boxes of wood and wire and glass, were always about more than just games. They were about creating moments, forging memories, and connecting people through shared experiences. The complete history of early arcade cabinet design isn't really complete, of course. New information continues to surface as collectors restore machines and discover details. The cultural significance of these objects continues to evolve as new generations encounter them, and the influence of their design continues to ripple forward, shaping how we think about interfaces, experiences, and the relationship between digital content and physical form. But for tonight, this is where we'll rest. With images of cabinet art dancing behind closed eyes, with the memory of joystick clicks and button presses echoing faintly, with the glow of CRT monitors illuminating the darkness of memory and imagination. These monuments to interactive entertainment, these carefully crafted vessels for digital dreams, these arcade cabinets deserve to be remembered, understood, and appreciated. They represent a specific moment in technological and cultural history that can never be quite replicated. And so, as the glow of your screen fades and the real world dims into sleep, let yourself remember or imagine those arcade spaces. The din of overlapping sounds, the visual chaos of competing lights and colours, the tactile satisfaction of responsive controls, the social energy of players gathered around shared challenges. The arcade cabinets made all of that possible, serving as the physical substrate for experiences that lived in the borderland between technology and imagination. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere an arcade cabinet still stands in the darkness, waiting for the next player to step up, drop a quarter, and press start. The cabinet doesn't know it's obsolete. It doesn't care that decades have passed since its heyday. It simply does what it was designed to do: invite play, deliver challenge, and transform electrical impulses into moments of engagement and wonder. That simple, profound purpose, embodied in wood and wire and glass, represents the heart of what arcade cabinet design was always about. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the glow of phosphor screens and the click of arcade controls, echoes of a time when games stood tall in dedicated shrines, waiting to transport anyone who approached with a pocket full of quarters into worlds of pixels and possibility.